Hossein, welcome to the Lifestyle Entrepreneur Show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. My pleasure to be here, Sue.
Oh, I'm super excited to be talking to you today about your default mode. The more you describe to me what's going on in our brains, that those conversations, the more I thought, I do this. I know people who do this. I coach people who do just this. So our listeners are in for a real treat from an expert. Perhaps fill us in. What is your background, your medical background? What do you know? You're a scientist. Tell us about that, Hossein.
Yes. So I've been trained as a physician scientist. I have an MD and a PhD. I've been in the field of oncology for over 2 decades now, really at the forefront of scientific innovation, helping to develop medicines for patients. I'm also an author. This is my third book, and this book is about also the cutting edge of neuroscience, where we're starting to understand how the brain works, and it has massive implications for mental health and productivity and success, and just delighted to share this with you.
So just to be clear, your latest book is called Breakthrough, right?
That's right. Breakthrough, Master Your Default Mode and Thrive. And it is a self-help book. It's a book about personal growth, self-discovery, centered around that default mode network. Yeah.
Mhm. So now we got to delve into more of what is your default mode.
Yes, we all have it. You may not have heard the term, but you're probably well familiar with this thing. So it turns out our brain has at least 7 networks. And so what is a network? A network is just different parts of the brain that connect to do a function for you. So you have the visual network, helps you see. We use it all the time. Auditory network helps you hear. Sensory motor cerebellar network helps you move and sense. And then you get to 3 networks that are really at, the cornerstone of mental health, mental well-being. One of them is the default mode network. So it is essentially your ego, it's yourself. It is a storyline of you that you are creating. And the way to recognize it is it's your wandering mind. So anytime your mind wanders away from the present moment, maybe takes you to the past, has you thinking about some old memories, or takes you to the future, has you anxious and stressed about something coming up, that's actually a part of your brain that turns on. It's called the default mode network. And we all need a healthy DMN to get through our day, to be successful. But for many of us, the default mode is on all the time, and it prevents us from being present, and it can get into the way and really contribute to things like anxiety, depression, addiction, and a host of other mental health problems. So this book is about helping you recognize and understand your default mode network, and to heal it so that it works for you and not against you, basically.
So I mean, I'm really curious, and you probably are as a scientist. How did they discover that there was a default mode going on?
Yeah, there were studies done where volunteers were put into an MRI, an fMRI scanner to scan their brain. And they asked the volunteers to perform some tasks. They wanted to understand what part of the brain is on when people are performing tasks and so on. They accidentally scanned somebody who was just sort of sitting idle, not doing anything, mind wandering, and they found that the brain of this volunteer was on, was lighting up. And they found that our brains are never really silent, never really at rest. Our brain is always on. And in fact, when our mind wanders away from the present, it is actually a part of the brain that turns on the default mode network. And so, yeah, our brains are never at rest. We're always thinking about something, essentially.
You just, I'm smiling and nodding because I'm thinking, yeah, it's really hard to switch off, which is why meditation is so difficult. But I remember you just reminded me of a conversation I had with my son in the car. He was like, I'm so bored. When are we there? And I remember saying, well, that's good. Be bored. Just think of nothing. And he said, you can't stop thinking. And it's kind of right, is what you're saying. You can't stop thinking. Your brain is naturally going to switch to the default mode when it's not focused on an activity, or it's in the present or in flow state. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we are a very unique species. We are the human brain. What the default mode is trying to do when it turns on, it's trying to help you be successful by thinking about the future, by planning, um, by thinking about the past, processing information, helping you make decisions. So it is trying to help you, But for many of us, this default mode network is overactive and we're constantly revisiting painful memories. It's contributing to things like post-traumatic stress disorder or depression, or it's having us so worried about the future that it's giving us anxiety. So it has good intentions, but unfortunately it can contribute to a lot of, challenges for us. And so the whole point of the book is coming to understand your default mode network and healing it and having it work for you, which when you're able to do that, you can be incredibly successful when your brain can give you the insights you need to, to live your life. So we can get into that. Yeah.
So is all this happening like subconsciously? Like we're
This
not
is all,
aware of it.
yeah. Well, it turns out, so I mentioned there's 7 networks. There's
Mm.
another network called Central Executive Network. And it's the part of your brain that's on when you're fully present. When you're fully present in this moment, you're focused on a task, or you're fully present doing, I don't know, prayer or mindfulness, or you're, doing a music performance or sports. In that state, you're fully present. You're free of that mental chatter, and so that is another one of the 7 networks. There's another network called Salience Network, and it's responsible for directing you back and forth between default mode and central executive. So what you might notice for me, for example, in the mornings when I am brushing my teeth, let's say, I I've noticed this, I immediately switch to default mode. As soon as I begin brushing my teeth, I'm thinking about the past. I go to memories from childhood all of a sudden. And so the salience network puts you off into that default mode when it recognizes you're doing something mundane, right? And it just, or let's say if you were driving your child to school today, your brain may have switched you over to default mode because it thinks, well, no need to be present here. Let's save some energy and have you, go into that default mode. So we're all starting to understand this. Is this subconscious? In a way it is, but you can train your brain to spend more time in the central executive and turn on that observing mind, which is the central executive, rather than being stuck in the wandering mind, which is the default mode, basically.
So is it for everybody? So one of the things we know is, or we've read before, is that we have a negative bias naturally. Our brains are trying to protect us, keep us safe in our comfort zones and the familiarity. And I'm sure you've probably heard about this. Is it that our default mode will always opt for that? And so we've still got the negative bias. We're still trying to keep us safe in our comfort zone. Or the default mode could be either way. It could be more adventurous.
Yes. So you nailed it. This book has 11, I call them mental knots. I don't call them disorders or syndromes. I call them knots, like knots in a rope, which you can untie and the rope will be back to being a rope. It's reversible. So negativity is one of these mental knots. Actually, stress is number one of the biggest problems out there. 2 is emotional pain. 3 is addiction, which we can talk about. 4 is it's negativity. So yes, our brain is wired to focus on the negative. It's how we got through the jungles and the caves and all the other places we were living very long time ago when life was very, very difficult. And yes, our brain, the default mode, is wired to focus on the negative. You may have received all kinds of praise from your teachers growing up, but the one negative memory is the one you remember, right? The nightly news starts with the worst story of the day. And yes, that's because our default mode of thinking is to focus on the negative. And it may have served us well a long time ago, but now we don't have to live that way. And so part of this, again, is coming to recognize that your brain does this. And for negativity, there's something very important to cultivate. It has a fancy term. It's called equanimity. But all it is coming to observe with your central executive, with your observing mind, coming to observe those negative thoughts, those judgmental thoughts, watch them and see them and let them go on their merry way and find some center and space from these negative thoughts. And when you free yourself from that negative judgmental thinking, it's amazing. I mean, you can really be a better thinker. You can be more productive and successful. And anyone can do this. It took me several months, but coming to understand, wow, this is my default way of thinking, and I don't have to live this way. It is an amazing release, as I'm sure you know very well.
Mm. So what's your technique there? Are you saying we meditate, you journal it out, how do you do that? How do you let go of those negative thoughts? Like every
Yeah.
time they come up every day, what's your process there?
In the book, I have what's called I call it an equanimity meditation.
Mm.
Fancy term. All you're really doing is you're learning to turn on that observing mind, the mind that can be present, that can watch the present, that can watch thoughts, experience them. And so mindfulness is a way of doing that. Prayer actually is a way of doing that. Um, and there are different ways of becoming present. We're all very different. But generally speaking, whatever it takes to turn on that observing mind so that you can watch those negative thoughts. And this is something you can train yourself to do, just as you train yourself to run a marathon, right? With practice, with intention, every day you get a little bit stronger. This observing mind with practice, with training, can get stronger and stronger and get so powerful that you literally free yourself from negative judgmental thinking and from anxious thoughts, from depression. This is something also you can do with a therapist. You don't have to do it yourself, but things like cognitive behavioral therapy, and there are a host of other tools that I describe in this book. They're all different ways of getting out of that default mode network and finding some freedom. So a lot of tools in this book. This book is about arming you with tools to help you break through, right?
Listen, I feel like the universe is sending me a message a little bit here, because this is about, I don't know, it feels like the sixth time in this last week that I have come across some content telling me to observe my thoughts, or to step outside and or get in touch with the true self. And I feel like this is what you're doing here, is you're saying
Yes.
there's all these ego conversations going on. I've been learning about internal family systems, as well as another theory around what's going on, all these different personalities. So the fact that you're talking to me now about your default mode network feels like this is the universe telling me that we need to share this with our audience. We need to help them figure out, how do we all observe these horrible thoughts that are telling us we're not good enough, we can't show up, our future is scary, we can't do it,
Yes.
our past tells us how many times we've failed before, therefore we can't do it again. But I like how you gave us some tools. So meditation for reluctant meditators out there, that, you've just been told by an expert that you should be doing this to observe your thoughts. I have found journaling really helpful. So that's why I was asking if it's a process that
Absolutely.
you've done, because I just find at the end of the day, if I'm able to write down all of the silly things that are going through my head, because at the end of the day, I'm like rerunning most of what's been going on. And when I'm rerunning it, I'm sort of saying, this didn't happen very well. I didn't do this very well. And then I realize I'm falling into that negative trap of picking up on all the things that didn't work well. And when you become the observer, and when I journal it out, then I can look at it and go, no, you tried, you had a go. Yes, it failed. This is what you need to do better. This is what you can learn from it. And I started asking myself this question: what can you learn from it? So I love that you're saying this. I find this really valuable. And I think our listeners really will do too. Now, earlier on in the conversation,
Yes.
you said we can train our way out of the default mode. So we've kind of talked about how to train our way out of the negative mindset. But I also know that there's a lot of people listening who stress and overwhelm comes up often. I mean, it's
Yes.
hardly surprising, really, in our modern life. You might have, I'm sure you can tell us, we have devices on all the time. We have very little boundaries. You'll have your clinical work, but you also have your book writing, your authoring, and you're building your business as well. So like me, you have a lot of plates spinning. I don't know if you have kids,
Yes.
but I've got three of them. You can probably hear them
Yes. I
making
have
noise at
3.
dinner time behind me.
Yes.
And it's full on, and it feels like you've got to keep up, that everything is advancing so quickly. So the overwhelm and the stress is very real. That, like you said, when you're in the car and you're zoning out of whatever's going on because you're just driving, you're on autopilot, or you're brushing your teeth, it feels like all these things pop into your brain. Must do this. Oh, but what about this? Oh, but what about that? And did you read this? And did you miss that? And you haven't checked in about this. It's just compounding and piles on like a weight on you, and you can't. I almost feel like the tension headache sets in,
Yes.
and I'm guessing that's our default mode network. So how do we retrain ourselves to I don't know, deal with things a bit calmer, a bit, I want to slow time down, honestly, so that we can
Yes.
actually get to
Wow.
some of these things and be present. Does that make sense?
That's right. Let's talk about time, but before that, let's
Mm.
talk about stress. Stress is the number one knot in the book. Stress is a big driver of our physical and mental health problems, contributing to things like our overeating, our weight gain, and diabetes, contributing to unfortunately heart disease and cancer. What happens in the brain when we experience stress is the brain releases stress hormones, things like adrenaline, cortisol,
Just
which
cortisol.
will,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right, increase our heart rate. Cortisol served us well thousands of years ago by shifting our energy away from the immune system, away from the reproductive centers towards our brain, which when we were, living in the jungles and facing predators served us well. But now when we're getting that stress response from thoughts and internal chatter and from our social media, it's wrecking our bodies, causing some serious damage. And so part of this step one is coming to recognize stress as a problem. That's step one. Step two is having the intention of reducing the stress. And so how do you counter the adrenaline and the cortisol? Well, you do that by stimulating what's called GABA. GABA is the driver of the relaxation response. There was a study at the Massachusetts General Hospital that found that relaxation exercises that promote this GABA actually improve health outcomes for patients who are hospitalized. And doing this several times a day gets the GABA going and prevents the stress from happening. So how do you get the GABA going?
Yeah.
Well,
What's GABA? Yeah. How do you
okay,
get
what's
it?
GABA? What's the fastest way to get? So if you're had a stressful week and you desperately need some GABA, what do you turn to? A lot of people turn to alcohol, which
Alcohol. Yeah. A glass of
gets the
wine.
gap.
I
It
mean, I
gets the
used to be
gap.
there.
Well, yeah, it does get the GABA flowing immediately. However, the alcohol damages your liver, it damages your cells, it contributes to things like cancer. Not the way to manage stress in the long term. Other ways to get the GABA going, 15 minutes of, I call it mindful relaxation, where you spend 15 minutes being present and relaxing, not reaching for your phone 3 minutes in, 4 minutes in, but consciously trying to prolong that relaxation, which initially may only last 10 seconds, 20 seconds, but you do it every day. You get it out to a minute, 10 minutes. If you can go 15 minutes mindfully relaxing, whether it's a meditation, whether it's, I don't know, journaling, taking a bath, gardening, whatever it is, walking in nature, 15 minutes, and you'll notice your brain after the 15 minutes. Observe it before, observe it after. When you see that a change has taken place, a light bulb will go off like, wow, this is how I prevent stress. And when you start doing it 2, 3 times a day, um, it can do wonders. It can prevent the stress response from happening. It takes an intention to do it, right? And an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? You have to put in the effort. If you don't put in the time and effort, you're not going to see any results. But the book is about helping you understand what tools work best for you. And for some people, prayer works very well. For others, mindfulness does. For others, it might be taking a walk. So it's about finding those tools and exercising restraint. Okay, if you don't have to check your social media, exercise some restraint and cultivating things like, which we can talk about, compassion, gratitude, also can significantly cut your stress response. So many different ways of doing it, but it's very important for us to find those tools because stress is causing some serious damage, unfortunately.
So Friday night at the end of a tough week, we shouldn't be reaching for the bottle of wine. We should be taking a walk or having a long bath. And you're right, all of those things, they do make you feel good. I don't know why we think that just because it takes a bit more effort, it's not as valuable. But actually, I suppose the things that take more effort are more worthwhile for our bodies. So a couple of times a day, if we can get and have a walk or do a meditation or do the thing that makes us feel calm. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it pays off tremendously. And I've heard a lot of people say, "Well, I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time to do this. I have three kids. I do have three kids." But guess what? You spend 5 minutes in the morning getting some sunshine, turning on that observing mind, listening to all the sounds around you, and seeing your thoughts. Just 5 minutes, notice the difference, and try it again right after lunch. And
Mm.
once you start seeing the benefit, you naturally want to do it more, and this process gains momentum on its own. And I wrote this book to help people out there. That is the primary purpose. But there are many other books and resources out there. So get out and uh, set the intention, and the road appears, basically, I think, as someone said.
Do you know, I don't know if you're going to know the answer to this, but I feel like I want to just have this conversation anyway to see what your thoughts are. But I feel like everything we learn about the evolution of our brains and how we work, I feel like everything tells me it worked in the past, but it doesn't work in modern life. I wonder if we're going to reach a point where we're going to see a whole new evolution where the brain changes all over again to adapt to the fact that we're now fighting with billions of pieces of data. And I suppose arguably you could say the filtering and selection, the attention thing that we do, where your RAS is constantly filtering and selecting of all this data, which ones to pay attention to. Maybe in years to come, we're going to see a change again. I guess evolutionary that's happens, but how long? And also, I was listening to something the other week where we switched from the side of the brain we would used to sort of look to our gut and our emotions to make instinctive decisions, but now we look more to logic. And maybe it's an East versus West cultural thing as well going on there. We are constantly so looking for the logical reason to do something versus turning to our intuition, for example. And I wonder if as with your medical background, if you're noticing anything about this, if you have any opinions on how we're going
Absolutely.
to evolve.
Well, I think pain and suffering is a tremendous opportunity for change. And I do think at some point we will awaken as a species and reach our full potential. So, but what's amazing about this understanding of the brain is now we have an objective framework to refer to everything you just mentioned. So, for example, the default mode network, it is a very reactive, judgmental way of living, bouncing back and forth between wanting and disliking, and centered around me. The belief system is around me. What is good for me, I like. What is going against me, I dislike. That is the default mode network. And it's, generally speaking, it creates a lot of pain, unfortunately, for us. But if you take a look at the central executive, the quality of life when you're in that state, it's less concerned about me and my, because it recognizes that all of life is interrelated. I am part of this amazing thing called life. When you're in the central executive, you're fully present. It is if you just observe the quality when you're observing your thoughts, when you're in between thoughts and you just observe that state, it's a happy place. It's a blissful place. It's like being around, I don't know how your kids are, but I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and when I'm with them, they're just naturally in this curious place, that a happy place. That is the quality of life in central executive. And in many ways, it is our higher self. And so I've noticed this, and it's amazing. It took me about 6 months to come to learn about my default mode and access the central executive. And I found that was much happier, more peaceful. I lost 10 pounds, and which was shocking. I said, what
Nice.
happened? Well, it's because I realized I was no longer overeating to manage my stress and anxiety. And addictive craving, that's one of the chapters in the book. But I was eating to eat, to enjoy eating. And I was eating slower so I can actually taste my food and not rush to the next activity. And when you give your body 20 minutes to eat, um, it'll tell you you're full. And when you observe that, you'll say, oh, I'm full. My body just told me I'm full. So I naturally just lost weight without any diet or exercise. Um, and so just getting a glimpse of that central executive, once we get a taste of it, I think we will want to be in that state. But unfortunately, many of us are stuck in the default mode, not recognizing there is a better place. It takes a little bit of effort to get there. But I'm not the first person to say this. Eckhart Tolle and centuries ago, Buddha and others have all said something very similar. I think the difference now is science and medicine have entered into the picture. And for many of us, that helps with the, adds a dimension to the journey, I guess.
So is the central executive the observer? That's your true self observing your default mode.
That's right.
Yeah. It feels like the central executive is when you're more in control and you're also, like you said, more objective. And
That's
in
right.
this state, there's more peace of mind. You're more creative, more likely to be adventurous
That's
because we're
right.
not worried about what's going to happen in the future. And we're not thinking about all the things that went wrong in the past that prove that we can't do something.
That's right. Now, for many of us, that, and including me, a couple of years ago, I had all 11 of these mental knots, which I've referred to: stress, emotional pain, addictive craving, loneliness. Loneliness is something that the default mode uh, inadvertently creates and traps us in negativity, which you mentioned, anxiety and anger, poor lifestyle, dishonesty and denial, and dissatisfaction. So these are all secondary effects of this overactive default mode network. And when you're in that state, the you ridicule change. If anyone talks about a higher self, your default mode network will ridicule it because the belief system is around, I am separate from you, I am different from you. I have to control the future, which is inherently impossible to achieve. We can't control the future, but the default mode network wants to try to control how the future unfolds, how the present moment unfolds, and that can trap us in dissatisfaction. So it seems almost impossible to free yourself from this part of the brain, but it can happen. And I think just knowing that it can happen, I think is can be quite liberating and powerful for some people. Yeah.
Mm. I want to delve into one of those areas and I would love for you to share an example. But before we do, there's one thing I'm thinking now. Somebody has a goal. Anybody listening probably has a goal to build a business of a certain, size or a certain income, or to provide them with a lifestyle where they want to travel or whatever. I'm always torn between the true self, doing the high self thing, doing the right thing, the peace of mind, and the future pacing that I want this goal, because I feel like the ego or the default mode is asking for the goal and is striving for the goal. How, in your experience, because you're obviously a very ambitious person, you're doing amazingly well for yourself, you're trying to train your default mode, but from your central executive, then you talked about not being able to control the future. But how do you then feel content with working towards a goal in the future
Yes.
from
Yeah.
that space? What are you doing there?
I think so. What I'm doing, the default. Okay, so I'm very busy, as I mentioned. So 3 kids and full-time job and writing books and all this other stuff. Um, and there are times where my default mode is on all the time. I'm constantly thinking about, oh, I've got a meeting in a couple of hours. I haven't prepared for it. I need to blah 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 blah. In the old days, I would get upset. I would get angry that my default mode is here. It would trigger some stress and anxiety. But now I have some gratitude for this default mode network when it turns on, because I recognize it. I say, oh, it's turning on to help me. And I have some gratitude for it, um, because people who don't have a functioning default mode network, unfortunately, people with Alzheimer's, people with dementia, their default mode network is not working. They have a hard time getting through the day. So I think understanding your default mode, having some gratitude for it, and especially when those insights arrive, right? We all know about those insights to a deep problem that suddenly appears in the middle of the day or in the middle of the night, those eureka moments. And when you kind of understand your brain and observe it, those insights come to you more readily. And when that happens, you become even more successful. Um, and by the way, there's nothing inherently wrong with craving and wanting life to be better. It's distinguishing between harmful craving and beneficial craving that's important. But all of this is meant to help you become more productive, more successful by developing a brain where the insights come to you more readily, and not one where the default mode network gets in the way all the time and slows you down by giving you unnecessary anxiety and pain. So That's
No, yeah, that's really well explained. Yeah. No, I completely get you now. It's yeah, it can be we can leverage it for the answers we need to happen in default mode when we're brushing our teeth, when we're in the shower, versus accepting the negative, the anxiety, the cravings, the addictive stuff, all the stress, all the bad things that you mentioned. Thank you so much. Okay, can we do a deeper dive into one of those areas, whether it be the anxiety, the stress, and an example of somebody who started with a default mode that is blocking them from success. It's blocking them from revealing their true potential and coming from a place of calm. And then how you then retrain that part of your brain. Or maybe it's that addictive thing. You talked about the overeating thing, the thing that's getting in the way, because I see a lot of people almost blocked, almost like caged and not showing up as their full self because I think this default mode is running the show.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Um, let's see. And by the way, these knots are all interrelated. And so when I was in medical school 20 years ago, we had a very simplistic view of the brain. We gave people we said, you have this disorder. This is who you are. Gave them some medicines, and that was that. And that's a very simplistic view of the brain. I mean, now we're understanding the brain in a more holistic way. So one of the knots, let's focus on loneliness, right? Loneliness, not recognized as a problem in medicine. But in fact, loneliness can significantly impact your health. The US Surgeon General has said loneliness can take off 10 to 15 years off of your life expectancy. And unfortunately, loneliness, yeah, it has all kinds of health and physical, complications. It is exacerbated by an overactive default mode network, right? The default mode network makes you feel separate, different from others, and it can, contribute to things like, unfortunately, racism and sexism, xenophobia, um, because of the inherent way that it thinks. And the thing is, loneliness is reversible. Anyone, and I suffered from this in the past because I was a very competitive person. My brain told me, if you want to be happy, you have to beat others at school. You have to be competitive. You have to be the most successful, make more money than others. And this constantly, judgmental way of thinking, which takes you
Yeah.
inadvertently down this lonely road.
Yeah. I
So,
guess I just want to
yeah,
interject here because I feel like people we misunderstand loneliness in that we think it's the elderly person sat at home completely on their own. I know many people in the entrepreneur space or in families who feel lonely despite being around lots of people all the time for that
that's
kind
right.
of sometimes for those reasons that you just mentioned. I'm thinking of my kids at school, thinking they got to be, competitive and feeling like it's a competition. I'm always like, it's not a competition. So they feel like they're out on their own. Nobody wants to play with me, even though they're surrounded by other children. But also at home, I've definitely experienced it in the family when we've been busy. When my husband's had projects on, build projects on, he'll be out at the weekends as well as in the week with other work. And I'm at home on my own. And despite the fact that I've got 3 kids around me and family, I can feel lonely. So I think you're right. It's misunderstood. It can appear for many reasons, and it is not diagnosed. So I just wanted to add that there.
I completely agree. And I absolutely suffered from the same condition, even though being surrounded by, family and friends. And so how do you reverse loneliness? Number one is recognizing it as a problem and setting an intention of wanting to free yourself from it, which at first is very difficult. Your default mode will ridicule this idea. Um, but learning to cultivate things like compassion for others, um, can break down that wall. And I'm walking down the street, for example. What does the default mode network want to do? It wants you to cross the street or just avoid eye contact. Instead, you challenge that by wishing well-being for this person, right? When somebody is, uh, cutting in line in front of you, the natural reaction is to get upset. Recognizing that and trying to reverse it. So compassion exercises actually have been shown to significantly cut cortisol and stress. And this is something you can completely reverse loneliness by cultivating compassion and empathy and gratitude, which at first sounds impossible, but you do it day after day, it gets easier. And after a few weeks, you'll recognize, wow, those lonely feelings aren't there. So
Mhm. Oh, can I share something?
absolutely.
I feel like this is an episode for Sue sharing a bit too much, but when my husband, so he will work away a lot, or and when he's not working away, we'll have a build project on. We renovate properties, and when he's doing that, he's out long hours or he's out the weekends, and I'm home parenting. And when I'm in a really low state and I'm probably in default mode, I'm like irritable. I'm thinking, I'm here, single parenting, working really hard. He doesn't understand what it's like. It's he's in a restaurant or a hotel having his dinner, having a nice calm dinner, and you get quite resentful, don't you? And then when I switch it and I say no, because he's working away, it means I don't have the pressure to earn the same and I can be here with the kids. He's doing that for us. And when I flip that narrative, I'm offering compassion for the fact that actually it's not nice for him. He wants to be home with the family. He doesn't want to be working all these hours and doing these properties all of the time, but he's doing it to help us build financial freedom and more of a future for the kids. So when I flipped that narrative, that, like you said, that compassion, it really made me start to appreciate him more, but also feel less lonely in that when we did have a phone conversation, instead of it being quite, general, what's happened today, it was a lot more, oh, he wishes he was here. We wished he was here too. And it was a bit more loving and embracing. Do you know what I'm
Absolutely.
saying?
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. I was at the park yesterday and some of my daughter's, friends were there and their parents. I was talking to the parents and the parents just had this anxiety and stress about my, child is not focusing. I've given him a tutor and I don't know what to do. And there's this anxiety. And it's like,
Mm.
just let things be, have some compassion. Things, maybe there is a higher power, trust in this higher power, at least a higher power that's higher than your default mode. and have some trust in it. Be present and you'll feel better and your kids will feel better. So I can absolutely relate to what you said. And but unfortunately, this is a big problem for many, many people out there.
Mm, mm. Oh, you just mentioned parenting. We could probably go on all night about parenting because that one, I feel like the bar is so high and you set it high and you can never quite get there. And you're always thinking, did I make a mistake last week? Did I make a mistake today? How's this kid gonna grow up in the future? What mistake am I making? And your ego and your default mode is constantly telling you how terrible you're doing. So yeah, I love that whole step into your compassion, show my love, surrender a little bit to it, be there, be trying to be the lighthouse parent at the end of it all. You know this with your three.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic chatting to you. I feel like I need to read all of your books and I need to get you back on the show to discover a lot more. So can we just share with our listeners where they can find your book and learn more?
Absolutely. My website is yourdefaultmode.com, a single word, your default mode. And yeah, the book is available on Amazon. It is in the UK store where it's selling quite well for whatever reason in the UK. But my social
Perfect.
media links are in the bottom of my website. They're all there, and would love to connect if one of your readers out there has a question. I'd be happy to answer it, and would love to be back on your show.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.